Hello, it's Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, ask a friend to select a story and their favourite things about it. I then have to watch, commentate, drop facts, and try to guess what their favourite things about each episode are.
Hello, Toby. You join me in the fertile, featureless fenland of Cambridge. I want to talk about Attack of the Cybermen. This is the story that rekindled my love of Doctor Who.
Well, hello everybody. That was Robin Bunce, who you heard talking there, who is a Cambridge academic, who has written many scholarly works about all sorts of things, but including Doctor Who and TV sci-fi, and recently organised some celebratory scholasticism about Nigel Neal's 1984 that was recently released by the BFI on Blu-ray. So he's always got his eye on opportunities to promote and discuss classic television. Doctor Who, no less, but also his father, the late Roger Bunce, who only died about a year ago. Was a cameraman at the BBC who worked on adventures with almost all of the classic Doctors and retained an interest in the show, popped up on a few commentaries and extras late in the range. I think we perhaps could have made use of him earlier. He also did a two-part Who's Round. He was really great, was Roger, was really enthusiastic, had a good memory, and was very happy to engage with our aficionados of the old stuff, and was a great fighter for the legacy of Television Centre. Well, and indeed had some things to say about it selling off. Great guy was Roger. So I'm happy that through being in touch with Robin, I still have some connection to Roger, because we used to email back and forth. He was always happy to answer questions or just to keep in touch. He turned up to see my show. He turned up when Webberfield was shown at the cinema in Leicester Square. Yeah, he was just a great guy, was Roger. So, with a nod and a wink to Rog, let's see what Robin's going to like about Attack of the Cybermen Part 2. Once I have hopefully said interesting things during it, and there's no better way to do that than to watch from the beginning, as it says here on BritBox, the 44 minutes that constitute Episode 2 of Attack of the Cybermen in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to watch from the beginning. That's what it says. Here we go. That's quite loud, isn't it? So block your Alexa. Alexa, Volume 3. So I hope your Alexa didn't respond to my Alexa voice. Maybe she's only got ears for me. Anyway, here we are. Doctor Who, in capitals, Attack of the Cybermen. By Paula Moore, who we suspect was Eric Saywood. Interesting that Part 2 is not all in big capitals. But Attack of the Cybermen is. So here we are. So this is we get a bit of Terry Malloy, even though he's strictly speaking dead by the time the episode proper starts. Again, there's lots of Cybermen become a bit sort of cannon foddery here. Although I suppose, they get smashed to bits in the invasion, don't they? But I think it takes a bit more doing. I always like the idea that, yes, they can be killed by their own weapons, although actually that is a bit of a design flaw. Carry with you the one thing that can destroy you. But as I say, maybe the idea that the Cybermen are invincible was very much played up by the Target books, and so they for fans of my age, they had with them a certain mythology before any of us first saw them. I'm sure when I watch Earthshock, that has been chosen by a big Finnish mover and shaker, but he's not actually sent me his thing. So anyway, The Cybermen were always my sort of favourite monster, but again, I think that's partially because part of me likes not liking the thing that everybody else likes as much, and because it was very easy to take the Daleks for granted, I suppose. Although I always did quite get excited when they were. It's how they were sort of rationed actually during my formative years during the show. If you think about it, if I started watching with The Invisible Enemy, repeat. So I suppose my first season proper was probably The Key to Time, although my first memories of a consistent series are season 17. So I suppose I started with Daleks. But then the Daleks don't really appear again until Resurrection. The Cybermen didn't have season 17, season 18, and that's a long time when you're a kid, 2.5 years, especially as I'd already got memories from previous couple of years. So we're talking sort of 4 years really till Earthshock, by which time I've got the Doctor Who monster book and various novels and stuff. So the Cybermen were always quite exciting for me, and I think these 80s Cybermen are very good. I think they deserve a lot of credit for those pilot suits that they augment with those pipes and sprayed silver, and the gloves at this stage I think are very good. The comedy, this is where Malcolm Clarke's score, which has much to recommend it. I love the Cyber March. I love those clanging bells that suggest sort of chilly metal, echoing around cold, dark, shadowy catacombs or ship's holds or whatever. But we've got the Steptoe and Son sort of riff, haven't we? And then we have the funny, Stratton's a bit sad he's having to be a Cyberman, and it's tonally a bit all over the place. And I always think if the music is having a laugh as well, I always think, well, that might be fun for you to do, but I'm not sure what I think of that. And yet, what Malcolm Clarke did elsewhere, certainly with Simon, and that score for Earthshock is amazing, and this has echoes of that. Time travel in an organ. Has he got an earring as well there, Glover? I love the way this Cyberman walks. The way he walks. He's like, I am walking like a jaunty Cyberman. Now, John Ainley is the name of the Cyberman that chats to Michael Kilgarriff. There's very much sort of two double acts. There's the cyber controller and jaunty John Ainley, and then there's the cyber leader David Banks with Brian Orrell as the lieutenant. But he is a relation, I believe, of Anthony Ainley. I'm sure there was a mention there. I'm sorry if I'm drinking a bit. I'm watching on the... you might snap your hand off this. This is very much... He likes it in the dialogue as well, doesn't he? The fact that things are a bit visceral and violent. Does Mr. Saywood, whose hands you can see all over this. Maurice Colburn carries off a jumpsuit very well. I think these two guys look great. I think Maurice Colburn didn't really mention last time. Odd that, because his return was great news. He'd made such an impression in Resurrection of the Daleks, but we already liked him because he'd been Jack Coker in the Household Haydock. He'd been Jack Coker in Day of the Triffids, which was it was a BBC science fiction that was a bit grown up. It was not like Doctor Who. It was one that you had to stay up a bit later to see, and it was altogether deemed a bit more serious. And the heroes are nice, but the lady's posh and the bloke's lovely, John Deteen, and Maurice Colburn was there to give it a bit of grit. He was the one that I think shouted at the government and to handcuff people to blind people in order that people. No, he didn't do that. But anyway, he was there. He was there very much as the sort of hard-bitten, tough guy, uncompromising, pragmatic kind of hero. Not necessarily the one that you liked, but the one you admired because he was a bit tough as old boots. And so having him in Doctor Who was quite cool. Then the idea that he would come back was very exciting. Odd though to then take everything that we kind of liked about him in Resurrection, that he was this, cold, cold-blooded killer, frankly. And I don't think I'm ever quite, the whole thrust of this episode, leads to the punchline. I don't think I've ever misjudged anybody so much as I did. The man who led the massacre of... The first thing we ever saw him do was to massacre some escaping prisoners, who then kill... the reason he escapes at the end of Resurrection is that he kills one of his own men in order to leave no trace. He's not that nice. He may be working for the Cryons in this, but I don't think they ever quite rationalise that with his brilliant villainy that he does in Resurrection of the Daleks, and what Maurice Colburn does very well. Although, of course, his final role was as lovely Tom Howard in Howard's Way, who was an altogether more benign and sort of series lead type, and it was the part that he was playing when he died. I think and I remember reading in the paper when he died, very, very young, just as he was, he'd finally sort of got a lead in this. No, he died because he's in Gangsters, of course, in which he's excellent. If you've ever seen Gangsters, there's an eccentric series, but I very much recommend you give it a bash. That's some nice direction with the Cyberman standing outside when the Cyber Lieutenant comes in. It's just a nice bit of positioning.
You will go to the console room. I talk slightly like I've got a nasal issue.
Whereas Mark Hardy is much more like that. Yeah, anyway, I've got to stop being hard on Brian Orrell for not being Mark Hardy. I sound like I've got a Mark Hardy crush, but I do like Mark Hardy's Cyber Lieutenant. This is nice. This is quite a shocking scene, I think, and I love the Cybermen with that's beautifully shot, that real close-up of the profile of the Cyberman. But yeah, the cobwebby Cyberman going through the catacombs, I think is really nice. And as a young fan, the idea that we would be revisiting the tombs of the Cybermen, especially as Tomb of the Cybermen was missing, and I don't think I'd seen a picture of the Cyber Controller at that point. I think it took a while before. I know there are pictures of the Cyber Controller in 2, but I don't think there were any that I had seen. I don't think until after. So the Cyber Controller being a domed thing without handlebars was a bit of a surprise to me. And it's nice to have, just as it's nice to have a Dalek with different things on its sucker arm, it's nice to have a Cyberman with a slight difference of design. And I think all of these pipes, coming off them are great. They've got a real industrial thing. Although they have now, you cannot now see the moving jaw, which I do think is because you can't quite make out what it is, and because it's a hint of something organic, I do rather like. I mean, they've even Stratton's mouth is even sort of slightly loose, isn't it? So he's got the. I mean, it's quite cleverly done in that these guys who are they're rejects, aren't they? Essentially, they are half Cyberman anyway. So the design syncs up, as it were. Finally they've allowed Perry to wear some stuff because she's going into the Coldy tombs. Because I think in her last costume you'd have noticed when she got cold. I can't believe it. And I suppose that, but there's part of me going, well, if you are gonna do the tombs of the Cybermen, should it not look like the tombs of the Cybermen? But I suppose actually they don't look. It's its doors, its entranceway is in a sort of vertical set with railings. It's not as actually as I think it's actually a reasonable update. I think you could go, well, this is in the same universe as the previous tombs, but obviously made in an 80s telly way. I don't think you don't reproduce exactly what you saw in the 60s, do you? In the same way that you don't make the Cybermen look the same as they looked last time. David Banks's body language is so good. You can. And I quite like the idea that the Cybermen are slightly, we shouldn't really be here. That adds to a nice sort of a nice creepiness. Michael Kilgarriff is a very interesting guy. He's he's a sort of after dinner speaker. He's a great fan of vaudeville theatre. And so the idea that he didn't do the voice in the original when actually he's done a lot of radio. He is a sort of voice man, if you like. So it's nice for him that he gets to do the controller this time. Yeah, so Maurice Colburn, just doing Howard's Way, and then dying halfway through, and they had to sort of carry on the series and rewrite it on the fly, I think, because he was making the show when he died very suddenly. That's brilliant. I love that bit because it's such a shock. And I'm a sucker for a Cyberman getting his head knocked off. This fight is quite fun. David Banks does a little sort of punch to the stomach before dispatching that the cobwebby Cyberman. It's quite fun. And I quite like that they don't have manhandle the Doctor, and Colin Baker really goes for it, sort of, suggesting the strength of the thing that's hurling him about. Now, I'd seen the Cryons because the week before I'd watched Saturday Superstore, which I didn't always watch. I wonder if I'd watched it deliberately, though, because I knew Doctor Who was coming up. And they actually showed the scene of Varn, played by Sarah Green, getting shot. And then they sort of cut back to her and she said, "Will Varn survive?" And you're going, well, it didn't look like it. She's been shot by a Cyberman. And she said, "Who is played by me?" It's like, oh, Sarah Green is in Doctor Who. And there's some quite heavyweight casting among the Cryon contingent. Not that you would have a clue, because you can't see who any of them are. They're curious costumes. Now, this is Threst is Esther Freud, the novelist, who married David Morrissey from The Next Doctor, and is from the Freud clan. The famous family. Is she Clement Freud's daughter? I don't know how they're all. And there's Emma Freud as well, isn't there? Who's married to Richard Curtis. And so they're all. Now there's sisters going on, cousins maybe, but they're all from the same bunch. So there's lots of connections to Doctor Who and to other illustrious areas of UK culture. And she was an actress, I think, only for a short while, Esther Freud, and then became a novelist, and an extremely successful one. So an interesting figure who I'd sort of love to interview, really, because I like anyone who's led an interesting and artistic life that also at one point played a Doctor Who monster with a see-through head and a moustache made out of bubble wrap or whatever. And some effort has been made with the Cryons. I don't think they're 100% successful. They do look like they've got dinner plates on their necks. Well, not dinner plates, kind of things that you serve canapes on. Frosted glass kind of servers. I think the moustache stuff is quite good because it breaks up the traditional idea of sort of femininity in monsters that are all played by women and have these funny sort of dancey movements. So I quite like that. I think that's quite a daring and not particularly cliched way of approaching an all-female race. Go give them sort of walrusy moustaches things, and the trick with the eyes is quite fun. That they have that, obviously that magnification going on, and so that the human eye is magnified, so it looks bigger within the thing, but you can sort of see that it's magnified rather than an actual eye. So what's going on there? But I don't mind that. It's playing with form, it's playing with shape. And here's Faith Brown, who's got a bit of added colour and massive breasts. And now I'm not saying that because I'm a starer at breasts or core look at the bazoomas on that type of fellow, but I think with Faith Brown, I think it would be dishonest of one not to notice that she's packing quite a lot of heat in the mammary department. And Faith Brown, really curiously, was an impressionist, very well-known TV face at the time, but for light ent and for comedy, and I think is really good in this. and gives a good acting performance. So a sign that, don't underestimate somebody's acting because we associate them with something else like vaudeville or stand-up or song and dance or whatever. Because I think she's excellent in this. And you would think she was one of those people, because she was in I like this scene with Perry and the Cryons because I like the levels that they have to the design. I think it's quite strikingly staged in that way. That opening shot where you've got somebody up quite high up and she's right at the bottom. I think it's nicely framed. It's a curious change in tone this episode, because obviously we lose a lot of the location and characters we had in episode 1 and are introduced to a whole new bunch for episode 2. So it is very much a game of two halves. I quite like the movement that the Cryons do. So you've got Sarah Green, who was supposed to be Koo Stark. Now, Koo Stark was a bit of a joke in our house because she was the sort of person that my brothers knew about, because she was an actress, but she was also dating Prince Andrew, which in those days didn't quite carry with it the burden of public opinion that it might now. It was just that Prince Andrew was seeing this actress who got her kit off in a couple of things. So in a way, she was supposed to be the one that was harming his reputation. Oh, how times have changed. And in fact, because as she proved in a couple of films, she was all grown up. Now he would probably use her to improve his reputation. But Faith Brown, I know some people who've who go to great efforts to sort of track performers down and things. Faith Brown is not as easy to find as you would think, seeing as I say, she did an I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, a while ago now, but that's still, more recent and more of a sort of everybody's seen phenomenon than a lot of people that we consider famous from Doctor Who, because, they might have starred in the second series of drama that was on in 1994 or whatever. And I was really surprised when my friend Ben said, well, actually, we never hear, we don't know where Faith Brown's old agent doesn't know where she is or whatever. So I wonder if she's just gone, well, I've had enough now. I've done it. Money, don't need to, I'll just keep my head down. Anyway, I hope she had, because when I heard that she was going to be in it, I was like, oh, really? I'm not sure about that because of the association. She was an impressionist and a sort of buck-toothed, brassy sort of, as I say, Saturday Night Light-ent, really, type of figure. And I think she does a lovely job here. I mean, some of their body language is slightly exaggerated, but that's what they're going for. These are creatures that move slightly differently. And I always think anything that makes an attempt to not be, just a person plodding about, and to do with aliens something that is suggestive of alienness, of strangeness, of weirdness. And I actually think the colour scheme that she has on her face is quite good as well. So, I'm sympathetic to people who don't think the Cryons work, but I think they're a pretty brave attempt to do something a bit different, and a race of female aliens at a time when, the classic series never did brilliantly with sort of female parts. The latter era is better. It does say a lot that you get all these very respected female performers from different fields, because you've got, Sarah Green, household name among kids, but for being a presenter. Faith Brown, comedian. Esther Freud is at that time a young, not very well known. And then Sarah Berger, a very highly thought of classical actress. I know Sarah a bit now. I interviewed her for Who's Round, but then she directed a friend of mine in a play. So we bumped into each other on a few different occasions, and are in touch on social media and stuff. She's always been very game about talking about Doctor Who, even though she's done, she was well known at that time for doing sort of proper classical stuff. I think it's funny, there's a cliche about Doctor Who being in quarries, but that's only because we know that they're quarries. I mean, as a kid, I didn't go to many quarries, so it's not like, oh, this is a thing that's round the corner. I didn't go to any quarries. I don't go to quarries now. I think, you know, and a lot of sci-fi we now see set in forests and more or whatever. I actually think a quarry, to be suggestive of a stark and bleak alien planet, provides a lot of visual interest. Yeah, sort of grey and brown or whatever, but the shapes of the mounds and the and you know you can sort of feel the gravel and the sand and I remember this from the first time. I remember thinking this was amazing and pretty grim. You know, the Cybermen beneath, and then that show of strength. This is very, you know, Brian Glover really sells it. And it's a simple trick because it's you know, it's shot very close up and stuff. But I think that's really simple and effective and nicely done. And Atwell's great, isn't he? He's the real deal. He's hard as nails. Doesn't let the facade drop for a minute. He was a memorable Bill Sykes, but he was Kenny Beale in EastEnders as well, New Zealand, from the New Zealand side of the family. You know, a few who has turned up in EastEnders over the years. I remember when Brian Croucher turned up in it as well. Being very chuffed, always pleased to see Doctor Who actors in work. But Atwell died. Atwell died quite suddenly, I think, and unexpectedly, and was starring in Hotel Babylon, or had just done a couple of, you know, semi-regular parts in it. And I remember, I think the week after he died, he featured in an episode, but it was as a kind of flashback. So I wonder if it had been shot with the previous episode, but it wasn't footage from an old episode. But as a result, he wasn't credited, I don't think. So his actual valedictory appearance on television was, you know, and in the old days, using that sort of footage of you, even though you're non-speaking, if you've been hired as an actor, you'd get a credit and, you know, blah-de-blah-de-blah. The lines are a bit more blurred now and people take the piss. But that Michael Atwell's last telly role was a sort of uncredited non-speaking bit just because it had been sort of fed into an episode, probably shot in a previous block. And they're like, can we just use that? And of course, so therefore no acknowledgement or anything like that it was showed post-mortem. That still of the Doctor and, you know, that they've seen, that the Cryons have just shown to Perry, of the Doctor trapped in there with Flast, to give a sense of where he is and what he's doing, is actually a still pressed on pause in horrible 80s videotape way of a scene that hasn't actually happened yet. So they're watching the future there. So yeah, sorry, I've just finished my pint of ice cold water because it's the hottest, one of the hottest weeks on record, and I'm watching everybody getting very chilly on Telos. So there's been quite a lot of chatting so far in this episode, but I suppose you did always feel at this time that Doctor Who was trying to tie in whatever was happening in the world. So Halley's Comet was very big, and, you know, it's quite humbling at Halley's Comet because it only comes every 75 years. He's very bold with his close-ups, and I quite like the fact there's one of those rare character looking straight at the camera, from Sarah Berger there, and she's beautiful, and she's even beautiful in her cryon makeup. Lovely eyes. You know, it's a really interesting that somebody's, even under all of that stuff, you can get a sense of somebody's, you know, beauty. So what was I talking about? Colin Baker, by the way, he is so much extra value that, you know, they're boiling under studio lights here. You totally buy that he is cold. He never stops. I think it's great leading man stuff. He never stops giving a sense of the urgency of the episode, giving the emotion, but also, you know, he never lets you forget that this is really, really freezing. It's great at all of that sort of stuff. But yes, Halley's Comet. I remember my science teacher going, and it's every 75 years, so I won't be around next time it comes. And me thinking that was a really brave thing for a grown-up to admit, you know, to their own mortality. Whereas now, I know when you're in your mid-40s, you know, you go, well, yeah, something that's in 75 years, I would be dead, and there's nothing I could do about it. But there's a chance, I suppose, that that yes, I might be alive the next time that it comes. But there was certainly this was certainly in the news, Halley's Comet, and it was something that you talked about in schools, and everyone as a nation was quite interested. And I like those things where everyone's sort of talking at the same time about the same thing. And he's very good at being. I like the way he goes, "I'm a rather angry one." He's very good at being pissed off with the Time Lords. So there was a sense that in Doctor Who bringing Halley's Comet into it, it felt like Doctor Who was being part of the national conversation, and even though it's about time travel, was reflecting what was going on, at the time that we were watching it. Was it January 1985? So I was just 11. I always thought the Viennese, Vastiel, the Viennesium's in Trial of a Time Lord, isn't it? Vastiel, very, very handy. I mean, yeah, very, very handy to lock your key prisoner in with this very unstable stuff. But you go, but they're storing it somewhere where it's cold. Yeah, I know. I think I can accept that. I suspect it's really nice. I've done it on audio, but I suspect it's really nice acting opposite Colin Baker on screen. He really invests in the person he's performing with, and there's an exchange of the dramatics. His dramatic delivery is very much based on the way that he's interacting with the other person. A lot of actors sort of take it amongst themselves and their dramatics are a bit more declamatory and that sort of sucks the attention into themselves. I always feel that Colin Baker is really good at engaging with the actors that he's on screen with, and that there's a respect there as well, which is a quality that, because it's quite a selfless quality, doesn't actually draw attention to itself particularly. I feel a bit sad now, because once these guys get inside, this is pretty much it for Bates, Stratton and Griffiths, and I think it's a real waste of Brian Glover. But that's great Doctor Who scary stuff. A hand coming out of the darkness, grabbing somebody by the ankle and sort of pulling them away. But it's quite cursory, isn't it? It's quite blunt the way that they get him, and that's again brilliantly shot. I love the Lytton lying on the floor with the cyber feet around him, and then the shot almost from his point of view of the cyber loom, as it were, the Cybermen looming over him. It's pretty tough the way that they just go, well, we don't need him, and it's too late, and we're going forward. But it's because Eric Saywood kind of loves Charlie Griffiths in the book, much of Attack of the Cybermen, much of which is told from his point of view. And indeed, I believe in his death scene, does he die with a smile on his face because he'd got out of his boring life and done something on an alien planet, and nobody would quite believe it, kind of thing. But I do think it's a slight waste of all of those characters. I mean, Stratton and Bates are set up to be, a bit more key to the plot than they actually are. They're there essentially as cannon fodder. I like this. I remember this at the time, thinking there was something about the sort of inexorable way that the spark sort of moves up the Cyberman's arm and it can't do anything about it, which is pretty grim. It's like watching your own death. It's a bit like watching a sort of rat coming to gnaw your face off, but it's sparks going up your cyber arm. And I remember, I remember that from the time. This is I'm a sucker for a bit of self-sacrifice. That's how I want to go. I want to leave me. You go. I'll hold them off. That's how I want to go. So if you can arrange that, that's and again, Colin Baker gives it the sort of requisite gravitas. I would quite happily have a death scene with Colin Baker as the person to suggest the price being paid, as it were, because he's very good at that. And I like these shots. I think these caves shrouded in the smoke are pretty decent sets. I suppose you never quite feel that they're a cave, because in a real cave, it's always, oh yes, they're caves, but they're very high ceilinged caves, because you have to have that to have the requisite level of light to make stuff visible in the studio. There's a lot more cryons than I suppose the cryons in the background of Threst's place are the same as the background cryons here. But I think the fingery stuff is quite the sort of like marionette fingers of the cryons is quite nice. Now this, I've just done an interview about this, about whether this series is for a television program, about whether this series is too violent or not, and I think they'd wanted me to sort of err on the side that it was, but I have to be honest and say that I wanted Doctor Who to be violent. I may have sort of mentioned this last week. This was getting to the point where Doctor Who was occasionally seen as a bit ropey and a bit of a kids' program. So any suggestion of blood, and that's really effectively done. It's nicely acted by Colburn, but it's the very simple effect of there being blood on his crushed hands. But it is sadistic. And it is kind of sadistic without an awful lot of context. Or I suppose the argument is, if they knacker his body, that's a suggestion to us, well, he's not going to recover from this. And so they're going to start turning him into a Cyberman, which is the beginning of the end, and his journey to his sort of final moments. But it's worth noting how little Lytton and Griffiths sort of have to do after that first TARDIS scene, at the expense of a lot of stuff with the cryons. And I'm not sure as a viewer that's particularly where I want stuff to be. I don't know. Oh dear, the Doctor has escaped. And I quite like, she has quite a cool payoff line. Does it? Oh, and this is quite grim, I seem to recall. When they kill her, but I'm not sure I'd remembered the crushed hands either. Which is worth noting in and of itself, because I tended to notice moments where green goo comes out of a Silurian's face or a Sea Devil's face, or the money shots, as you were, the head of Stengos, all the grim stuff. I very much was the stuff that I sort of took away with me a lot of the time, particularly because that was the stuff I thought would earn me brownie points with the kids at school. This is very well lit, this scene, actually, because I suspect it's all quite simple, little bits of flattage and lots of darkness, because it's a piece of scenery that's not seen very much. So I suspect that was done on a bit of a budget, and it's actually simple but effective, nice lighting. Good use of shadow. Well done there, everybody. But yes, I love the way that... I like the cryon's fingers, and I like the way she makes her lower the gun there. I'm actually quite enjoying the cryons as a visual, apart from the dinner plate necks. I don't quite know what's going on there. Is that part of what they're wearing? If so, it's or because if that see-through stuff is the skin on their head, have they got like big gill necks? In which case that's a bit strange. Love a bit of cobweb. Sometimes a bit of cobweb is rather fun. And I like this idea of there's that they're rotting away because something's gone a bit wrong, and that we've got the distress signal. The Cybermen have one weakness. No, they don't. We've established in this story they've got about 1,000. They always react to the distress of another, which seems a little bit un-Cyberman-y, actually. My feeling is a Cyberman would go, if one's in trouble, what can we learn from that? Rather than we need to go and rescue that one. We only go and rescue that one if it's got something really important. Otherwise, nuts to you. It would be illogical. Now I remember this being, this being pretty grim, isn't it? Because they essentially chuck her outside to boil to death, which is pretty harsh. But I quite like her cussed response, and it's a terrible line. I don't have an instrument for measuring time. It's very slightly overblown-y, sci-fi stuff, but actually Faith Brown succeeds in making it a kind of sarky riposte. But this is pretty grim, and Banks's body language is absolutely magnificent. He's there going, I'm the cold, impassive thing, wall of steel, whereas she's the opposite of cold. She is a creature of movement and all of that. And I love that contrast to her trying to get in and Banks just standing there, and she's the organic boiling flesh and he's the cold steel. And I think that's pretty grim and very nicely done, and well done, Faith Brown. But this seems, I think, and I mean it all happens in one camera shot as well, isn't it? It's a very sort of cheap end to, and it's never really quite clear what's going on. You don't know why he gets electrocuted, really. There's no explanation there, and then these guys just run off, and one camera at the end, and I mean you barely see Glover because of the blocking, and Jonathan David's in front of him. I think Glover and Griffiths and even Bates and Stratton deserved a little better than that to all be mowed down quite mercilessly. But I suppose part of Saywood's shtick is that life is merciless and harsh and cruel, which is why then having a Cyberman go, oh dear, we've got to get out of here, as one does in a minute, sometimes the blocking or individual choices or bits of direction are sometimes odd with when this thinks it's intergalactic the Sweeney. It's suddenly it can, there are sort of lapses or changes that reminds you that occasionally it's Doctor Who doing its best and not always quite managing. But this is all exciting. I love an exploding cyber chest. So this was the bit that we saw in on Saturday Superstore, and it's quite a protracted death, and I like that light effect. And Sarah Green going, will Varn survive? And I think when this happened, I expected something more because it had been sort of teased in Saturday Superstore, and it turns out it wasn't teased at all. It was just a massive spoiler because you never really see any of them again. And in fact, if she'd lasted for a couple more minutes used to the plot, because you wouldn't have seen her again much after this anyway. So if she'd been a bit more careful, she could have survived. But it's almost like it's an Eric Saywood script. If somebody's got a chance to get killed, we will take that chance to. I'm just slightly surprised we didn't cut back to poor old Threst looking at a monitor, and Cyberman comes and kills her and her mates as well. So indeed, the baby is given, he's given a few people a stay of execution. He's getting soppy in his old age. But of course, then we have this slightly stressed. Colin is so good at this. That touching her on the shoulder and giving her, he invests, he makes you important as another actor, as another character in the drama, and I think that, and he's very good at those just tiny sort of touching little moments, often in quite ridiculous or scenes that or scenes that are slightly flawed that just need a little of injection of humanity is the wrong word because he's not a particularly human Doctor, but of empathy, of character interaction. But yes, and this is quite grim for old Lytton, and I think as somebody who liked Lytton and liked the idea of him coming back, when it gets clear that they brought him back to kill him. Oh, and I like that. I remember laughing out loud when the Doctor is actually quite pleased that it's hit the TARDIS shape, and that's quite a nice trick to play on the audience to make them furious that that the TARDIS may not now be doing the thing that we know and love it for. And playing with our expectation, I think that's quite fine, and I do like the way that Colin Baker pats it affectionately as if to go, I actually quite like it that things go wrong, and and it's a good lesson for life, and a very good lesson for Doctor Who is to sort of treat shortcomings with a certain rueful pleasure in a way, to sort of go, it's quite nice to be reminded that actually nothing's perfect, and you have to be like that to be a Doctor Who fan, because Doctor Who, for all its brilliance, it treads a fine line. It's about somebody travelling through space and time in a police box that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. It's about a benign, funny alien doing sci-fi adventures that vary from the outlandish to the scary to the extremely ambitious to the sometimes misconceived, and you have to all produced on multi-camera BBC budget, and so the fact that the TARDIS doesn't quite work properly and goes wrong, the fact that that's slightly reassuring is almost a comment on Doctor Who itself. Now, Cybermen killing each other seem to be the way, and I seem to recall in the Peladon books that there was a thing of the ice warriors sort of almost ended up by accident shooting the Ice Lord and vice versa, and it happened a bit with in my head with the Cybermen as well, or certainly when the lieutenant and the leader both kill each other there, that seemed like, oh, is that what Cybermen do now? And that takes the the Doctor out of the equation, and you are thinking, oh well, you see, but what they're doing there is it's meaning that the Doctor doesn't have to partake in any of the destruction, and then he shoots the cyber controller to bits, and then gets to be sad about Lytton, and Lytton, I suppose, got to help there. That's the leg it, Nigel. That's it. Somebody I think has said, I can't remember who said that, but credit to somebody said that those is it the discontinuity guide? I don't think they put Nigel though, but yeah, that idea of, oh, quick, we gotta get out. But all Lytton really did there was stab the cyber controller on the shoulder with some pliers. But yes, he was helping. He was helping the Cryons. I think that's brilliant in the acting from Colin. But I think the script is wanting to accept that because we're told it much more than maybe that it earns it. I feel Lytton and Griffiths, as I say, sort of faded a bit there, which was a shame. But as I say, I like the Cryons. And I think the way that the controller bats, attacks the Doctor, it was quite vicious there. Oh, they get credited before Bates and Stratton. That's very interesting to me. Monsters before humans, unusual, but I suppose Banks and Kilgarriff are kind of returning, talent from the past. Oh, MAC Adams, he's just passed away, the film editor, Mac Adams. But yes, I think the way that the cyber controller sort of it's quite harshly smacks the Doctor about is almost psychopathic there, Kilgarriff, in his final sort of flourish. So there we go. It's tonally quite uneven, but I know some people who really don't like Attack of the Cybermen. I think I prefer the first half to the second half, if I'm honest. But I actually quite enjoyed the Cryons there, watching them certainly as a design. I think I admire them more for what they're aiming for than necessarily what they pull off, maybe. And as I say, I think I could have done with a bit more. I think I could have done with a bit more somehow tying in what Bates and Stratton and Griffiths are up to in that second episode with the larger plot, with the wider plot, because otherwise just feels like you Saywood's gone, well, I've brought all these characters in to make it exciting when they die, but then even then Bates, Stratton and Griffiths all die in the same scene almost. I mean, I thought it was one shot, but there's two camera setups, one from 1/3 up the corridor and then one at the end of the corridor, but it's quite a sort of cursory part of the storytelling. It's obviously only a handful of flats, and it's done with great economy and well done for doing it, and broadening the canvas, but it does mean it just feels a little bit cursory, and yes, that dissatisfaction, you could say, well, that's the writer going, life is hell, war is hell, life is cheap, in space no one can hear you die unnecessarily in a subplot that's not gone very far, and it buys us that those moments where we learn that Lytton's not all that bad, but again, they make no attempt to reconcile that with the guy we knew from Resurrection of the Daleks, so it's sort of telling us, but I think without much sort of evidential backup, apart from what he's doing for the Cryons, but they don't sort of they never weigh that up with all of the other stuff that we know about him. And I don't think it's because there wasn't time, because I thought some of that episode was quite a lot of sort of, you know, chat or, you know, sort of actiony sequences that you know, weren't necessarily giving us an awful lot. Although I did like all the Toomey stuff. So anyway, I've got to choose 2 things and a bonus that I like about Attack of the Cybermen. And what did I choose? I chose Brian Glover, and I chose the sort of London Euston-y stuff, Euston Filmsy stuff. What do I like about part 2? Well, I do like the idea of the, you know, of the cyber rejects. I think they're a reasonable sort of variation on the myth, and it does lead to that nice scene where, you know, Atwell, who does it very well, strips his glove off and you know, really squeezes Griffith's hand, and I think that's all very well done. So yeah, the sort of cyber rejecty, you know, that and the fact that it has that sort of tough guy element that is echoed in the stuff in part 1, the gangster Euston Filmsy stuff. The fact that you've got Michael Atwell doing it and being this sort of tough, bringing this sort of tough London attitude, which again was not massively usual for Doctor Who at the time, when villains tended to be sort of RP and that sort of thing, and that, you know, there's a sort of, you know, working class sort of Cockney people in Doctor Who tended to be sort of cheapy or chirpy supporting characters, or factotums or soldiers. You know, I can't like that sort of gritty thing. But is that a good enough thing to say? Or is it that I like the outside, you know, the planet surface stuff, the quarry? I do like the quarry. And I like the Cryons movements. I like the Cryons. I think I'm going to say the Cryons. I don't think they're 100% successful, but I don't quite know why, apart from maybe the plate gillnecks. But I do like the movement. I do like the thing of going, well, you know, let's make them, you know, sort of all feminine, but with moustache. I like women with moustaches, is what I'm saying. But if they're from space, I think there's quite a lot of creativity got into them, and quite a lot of imagination gone into them. So I'm going to say the Cryons, and the cyber rejects. And I think I'm going to say, for my bonus thing, is the violence. Because as a kid, the exploding cyber heads, and even though as I say, I've never quite forgiven them for not making the Cybermen invincible, but all of that stuff, and the machine guns, and the action sequences, and the crushed hands, and all of that, and the spurting goo, was absolutely the stuff I lapped up. Now, of course, it's what ultimately led to Doctor Who's hiatus and all sorts of issues. And I do think I have a very complicated relationship with it, because I also acknowledge the fact that some of it, you know, maybe goes too far, and was it suitable for the time period. But as a kid, it's sort of what I wanted. And I think you can do violence within context. I don't think Saywood always gets it, because I know he wanted the Doctor to shoot 2 guards in Resurrection of the Daleks, and that was in his script, and he's always gone, well, you know, when you get involved in violent situations, sometimes violence is a consequence. The whole point of Doctor Who is that that's not what the Doctor does, I sort of think. And yes, I know the Doctor does sometimes kill people, but and it's maybe hypocritical to go, well, the Doctor does it at a distance, but then shouldn't do it, you know, in terms of directly. And then I go, well, actually, that's hypocritical, because in the same way that I get annoyed with people who don't like being confronted with the fact that animals are killed for meat, but will happily buy something from a supermarket. And you go, well, so you don't mind so long as you don't have to see it being done or do it yourself. And I think, well, no, I think it's the opposite. If you're prepared to do it yourself, I think you're entitled to do what you want. But anyway, so I don't know. Do you know what? I've got a big dilemma here, because I don't know that I do like that, because I certainly don't like the Doctor killing things, but I did like the adult. I mean, it's not massively adult, is it? It's got comedy organ music when it's got sad cyberhead and all of that sort of stuff, but it's got Faith Brown melting in it, but that's pretty grim. But that's a good scene, isn't it? That's a good scene. All right. What am I going for? I'm going for... I like... So I've got two things for this episode and a bonus thing. I'm going to go for... I like the Cryons, even though they're not 100% successful, and I think we spend a little too much time talking to them. I like Faith Brown's death scene, particularly that contrast between her and David Banks. And I like Matthew Robinson's direction. I think that means that I can have the toughness and some of the violence, but I think it's partially to do with a kind of attitude he has, and a kind of backbone that he gives it. I think there are some lapses in choice sometimes, especially when we go for some of the comedy side of it. Which Resurrection of the Daleks actually has less of, and I think Resurrection is actually slightly better directed than Attack. But I still think Matthew Robinson is one of the few 80s directors who you can go, but I can actually single you out as a director because I can see your individual flavour as a director that you bring to it. And he does bring to it a sort of toughness and an aptitude for action and an uncompromising style that lends itself well, particularly, I think, to the two scripts that he gets. So the Cryons, Faith Brown's death scene, Matthew Robinson. They are my two things and my bonus thing. 3 in total. Now then, Robin Bunce is going to choose his things. I should have thought of a better word than things, shouldn't I? Attack of the Cybermen, episode 2. What's he chosen?
Episode 2, and yet more delights for us to sink our teeth into. My 2 picks, and then a third pick which kind of encompasses the whole story. My first pick is going to surprise some. Malcolm Clarke's music in this story is not universally loved, but I have a lot of time for it. I'm not thinking so much about the themes that Malcolm Clarke writes for this story or this episode. I'm thinking more about his use of texture, his use of kind of dissonance, to express the kind of emotional turmoil which is happening during this episode. So I'm thinking about the moment where the Cyberman is being shot at point blank range in the head in the TARDIS. That kind of very crunchy, dissonant chord, very electronic textures. Love that, love that, love that. I do like the recurrence of the cyber theme, which of course we first heard in Earthshock. And I just love the way that Malcolm Clarke is using analog synthesizers. It sounds like he's using the CS80, the classic Yamaha synthesizer, which was, very, very big in the late 70s and early 80s. I like the way that he's constructed this kind of sound universe, which is kind of glassy and cold and slightly and there's a lot of ring modulation in there, particularly the kind of ring modulation bell sound that he's created, which just kind of seems to epitomise and encompass everything that the Cybermen represent. So there we are, Malcolm Clarke's music. That's my first pick. My second pick from this episode is Lytton's death. I have to say I do love Maurice Colborne. If I'm saying his name wrong, forgive me. But yeah, I love him. I saw him first, I think, in Day of the Triffids. I think in 1981, and I adored him in that, and I adored that entire production. I didn't see much of the Peter Davison years, as I said earlier, but I did watch the Dalek episode, so I was kind of aware of Lytton as a character from that. I liked him. I do like mercenary characters. You know, there's a lot of kind of moral complexity there, and I like the fact that this is his kind of redemption. This story in this episode particularly is his redemption. And yes, and his death is very, very moving. I think it's played enormously well. I like the way that his death brings out the Doctor's humanity again. And again, it's a different kind of humanity. There's a kind of vulnerability to the Sixth Doctor, and I guess we sometimes think of the Sixth Doctor as kind of pompous and kind of self-regarding, but there is this kind of undercurrent of kind of self-doubt in Colin Baker's performance, and Lytton's death allows Colin Baker to kind of perform both aspects of the Doctor's character, and it also allows Nicola Bryant to come in. And I think I like the way that Perry has her own moral compass all the way through these two episodes. You know, she's not simply saying yes, Doctor. She's thinking about things from her own point of view, and Lytton's death kind of allows all of those things to come through. Obviously, the kind of torturing of Lytton's conversion leading up to his death, all of that is kind of very interesting as well, and you know, it's very video nasty, appropriate to the era, I guess. So yeah, so Lytton's death, that's my second pick. So finally then, what do I like about these episodes combined, my kind of overall pick? I think the thing I haven't really mentioned so far is the Cybermen, and this is what I like about this show. I think this show, more than any other Cyberman story in the classic era, really explores what the Cybermen are and what's distinctive about them as villains. So yes, we see the conversion process in this second episode, and it's kind of hinted at previously in the first episode as well. We see the conversion process much more fully than we see in any other episode of the classic era. And we also have a huge amount of cyber history thrown in. So there's callbacks to Mondas, there's callbacks to Telos, Cybermen in the sewers. Presumably they've been knocking around since the 70s or whenever it was that the invasion episode took place. So I love the fact that this takes the Cybermen seriously. I love the fact it's rooted in this fictional history of the cyber race. And I mentioned H.G. Wells earlier, I'm going to mention H.P. Lovecraft here. I think the thing that Paula Moore is doing in this episode, by the constant references back to cyber history, is she's creating what H.P. Lovecraft calls a background of evil verisimilitude. Try that again. A background of evil verisimilitude. That is to say, she's creating this kind of fictional world that we believe in because we've seen it before. And again, that makes everything more plausible. So there we are. I love this. I think this is by far the best Cyberman story of the classic era. At least in colour. Okay, I'm going to back off that. I'm getting a bit excited. Yeah, at least it's the best Cyberman story of the colour era. So I enjoyed this enormously. As I say, this is the show which rekindled my love of Doctor Who back in 1985, and I owe it a great deal for that. I've always loved watching it. I was so excited when they released it on VHS. I was so excited when the BBC released it on Blu-ray, and on DVD, and I'm looking forward to the BBC releasing it on Blu-ray. So I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did. And you know, a day watching Attack of the Cybermen is always a good day. I hope you felt that too. Plugs. I should plug some stuff, shouldn't I? Well, if you want to read about my thoughts about Doctor Who, get Doctor Who and Philosophy Bigger on the Inside and read my chapter about the Daleks. It caused a bit of a stir when it came out, and yes, it gives a different account of the Daleks' origins than the one which is usually kind of put out there. Secondly, 12th Night. It's a book about the Peter Capaldi era. I've got a chapter in there about the politics of Peter Capaldi's first 2 seasons. It contains punishing detail, lots of references to all kinds of political philosophy and political events. You'll love it. Finally, I am a host on Shoulder of Orion, the official Blade Runner podcast. When I'm not thinking about Doctor Who, I'm thinking about Blade Runner. So, you know, why not join us on Shoulder of Orion, available in, you know, all good podcast outlets. Sorry, that sentence ran out of steam a little bit there. Anyway, lovely seeing you, Toby. I look forward to seeing you in April, when we're going to be talking about Nigel Kneale and 1984 in the Cambridge Festival Ideas. And if that happens to be in the past, it was great seeing you. You were amazing. Take care, Toby.
Oh, bless him. I love that contribution. Especially as I actually thought I kind of ran out of steam there. And it's nice that, isn't it nice? Obviously, because we have a a genuine advocate for the story and for the episodes, who I think perhaps made up for some of my shortcomings, because I do feel that in my heart of hearts, and going into this, if you'd said to me, "Oh, you'll be choosing anything to do with the Cryons for episode 2," I'd gone, "Nah," because they're not great. But I actually, watching them this time round, they seem to be, to me, to be the most visually interesting, the most pleasant surprise. And I even like the way they were shot in some of those wide shots as well, but they also sustained a close up and all of that. And I was, I think, appreciating the ambition rather than the success. But I think it's because the things I like about the story particularly tail off a bit in part 2, because I like Lytton, I like Griffiths, I like the toughness, and there's less of that. And I think also because I'm certainly not with Robin in it being the best cyber story of the colour era, because I'm a child of Earthshock, and I remember the extreme effect that Earthshock had on me, and nothing was ever going to quite match that. And also, I remember Resurrection of the Daleks, and I see this as a companion piece to Resurrection of the Daleks, because it's Matthew Robinson again, because it's Maurice Colborne again. But I think Resurrection is a slightly more complete production. There's problems with the script, I know, but in terms of, I think, and this is where I didn't choose Malcolm Clarke's music where Robin did, because I can't quite forgive the little comedy interludes that Malcolm Clarke sprinkles in, which I know are in cahoots with the director and the business some of the actors throw in. But that to me means it's a slightly more sort of schizophrenic tone. And sometimes that's what Doctor Who does so brilliantly. It can do deep seriousness and then something very silly, and the things work hand in hand. But they work better when and this is, I think, where some of the alchemy of Doctor Who comes in, where all the disparate elements somehow hold together, even though they shouldn't. So a scene will make you cry, even though it's slap bang next to a scene where it's got some highfalutin, ludicrous sci-fi concept that everyone's playing with a terribly straight face, or even throws a joke into and winks at the audience slightly. And I'm not sure I feel that Attack melds quite as well, even though there's still loads that I love. It's certainly, and I did watch it once and went, oh dear, this isn't very good. This is about 10, 15 years ago, where I changed my mind on it slightly, because it had always been a story that I'd enjoyed. Because it's quite action packed. I like the action adventures. So sometimes my go-to Doctor Who is one that's got lots of explosions and lots of deaths and all of that. And I think it fits the bill there very, very nicely. I think Robin is absolutely right to highlight how Colin Baker, for all his spikiness, for all his alienness, he does give real weight to moments of death or moments of self-sacrifice, and he has a sort of wistful self-reflection among the spikiness. And I think I was talking about other stuff during Lytton's death scene, which was one of Robin's key choices. And I don't know, maybe it's because I was talking all the way through it this time, but I don't know. Well, anyway, it's nice that Robin articulated different things from me and articulated them so well, because I think maybe my second half was slightly unfocused, and maybe slightly had emphasis in the wrong place, and wasn't brilliantly thought through or put together. But in a way, I can forgive myself for that, because that is kind of my feelings about the second episode itself. So I can sort of say my commentary was thematically apt. And then in comes Robin and but does what Happy Times and Places should do, is puts an absolutely positive spin on so much of it, and did so with great with great articulatedness, and so do check out all of his work. And sadly, so I'm betrayed by time, of course, because yes, when Robin did this, season 22 was not out on Blu-ray, which it is now. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm on the commentary for Revelation of the Daleks, which was nice, because it means I got to do a BBC commentary with Colin Baker. And for years, I'd never actually done a BBC commentary with any doctor. and I've got to do some with Tom now, and I've got to do some one with Colin as well. So I've got to share a commentary with the Doctor, which I hadn't done until pretty late in the day, and I was glad to be there when Colin completed his, because he'd not done Revelation because he'd been off on tour or something, so hadn't been available for the dates. So it's important to get the Doctor on as many as possible. But I didn't end up going to the Cambridge Institute of Ideas or the Festival Ideas that he'd arranged, and he was so very understanding. I sort of chickened out. My Chez was very ill, and I was very reluctant about travelling because of COVID and all sorts of other things, and so I backed out in the end. So Robin, I'm afraid history has made a liar of you, because I wasn't brilliant. I wasn't there. I was not there. I do not remember it, which is very appropriate, seeing as we were talking about 1984. It has been erased from a history that never happened, even though in your version of history there it had, and it went brilliantly. So there, that too is my own inadequacy is thematically apt once again. So at least, yeah. At least, my failure always reflects some form of subtext or thematic appropriateness. So, so yeah. At least it's a failure, that absolutely works in context. And I think maybe that's a metaphor for my life in general. Anyway, look, I hope you enjoyed Attack of the Cybermen. I hope if you didn't enjoy Attack of the Cybermen before, you've enjoyed it a little bit more this time. I hope I accentuated the positive as much as because, as I say, I find that a perfectly enjoyable episode to watch. And particularly the first episode. But I don't think it quite. I think it could do with another draft, maybe. But that's sort of nitpicking. I would perfectly happily sit and watch that adventure. I just found it slightly more difficult to talk about than maybe I'd anticipated. But that's all right. Anyway, I'm going to open the back door now because it's really hot, even though it's late at night. And I'll let Bernard the dog out. And then when he tries to come back in, I shall stand impassively and watch him melt. I'm not going to melt the dog. There's taking thematic reflections a little bit too far. So anyway, thanks very much for viewing and listening, and I hope I haven't misjudged a Doctor Who episode, in this case Attack of the Cybermen Part 2. Goodbye. Well, thanks ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock. My special guest is Homerton College, Cambridge's historian of ideas, Robin Bunce, who can be found on Twitter at RenegadesRobin. I'm grateful to him and to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Gareth Bowley, Leslie Coots, Ben Cowdell, Peter Crocker, Philip Craggs, Lee Kremin, Steve Cunniff, Dave Curran, Simon Curtis, Paul Philip Dahlgren, Matt Dale, Rob Dawson, Chris Davis, Hugh Davies, Robert Davies, Shanty Day, Ian Dean, Tim Dickinson, Drew, Paul Dykes, Andrew East, Jeff Edwards, Andrew Egan, Mark Findlay Smith, Paul Gibbons, David Gillespie, Charles Gears, Ginger Animator, Lisa Gledhill, Robin Groan, Paul J. Guest, Thomas Guerrier, Aaron Gullius, Hammer House of Podcast, and Susan Harrison. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork Dylan Patterson. Oh gosh, how can I get my name read out on the credits like that? Well, all you have to do, dear listener, is to become a patron, and that costs as little as £3 a month. Go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock for £3 a month or more, and there are things to lure you up the higher tiers, but to be honest, most of the stuff is available at the lowest tier, £3. I don't like the idea of denying people things. And you get 3 releases a week, and that doesn't include the pictures of my dog. They don't really count, so actually 4 if you do like the pictures of the dog, and some like the pictures of the dog more than any of the other things, which suggests to me perhaps there's more of a future in dog pictures than in comedy and or Doctor Who nichery and or a fusion of comedy and or Doctor Who nichery, or whatever this is, or just me talking. This is just a word salad now. Anyway, those things are all part of the, and this is luring you there, isn't it? Oh yeah, I need more of this. I need a middle-aged man stumbling over his words and clearly not sure what the end of the sentence he's about to embark upon is. Anyway, £3 a month gets you advanced releases, bonus material, and an exclusive podcast called Far Too Much Information, which is the sister podcast to Too Much Information, which you get probably a month, maybe 6 weeks in advance of when it's released to everybody else. Ditto the Indefinable Magic. Some of those are a couple of months before they're released to everybody else. And these, the Happy Times and Places, they're 6 months in advance. So if you thought that reference to the Cambridge Festival of Ideas and the imminent release of season 22, when Robin did them, you thought they were out of date then. I mean, they're even more out of date now. Maybe they've released season 2 on microchip by the time you get this. No, it's usually about 6 months or so. So patreon.com/Toby Haydock. Goodies, advance releases, £3 a month, and every tier also has a 10% discount if you sign up for a year in advance. I know not everyone can do the monthly thing or doesn't want to. God, when we're going to be obliged to pay probably the soul of our firstborn for a tank of petrol. But Ko-fi.com is where you can go and do a one-off payment if you so fancy it. And there's no bonuses there, but there's also, you're not tied into a monthly commitment. Ko-fi.com/Toby Hayden. Oh, that's funny. I didn't have time to plug the idea of giving these 5-star reviews and leaving something nice wherever you happen to be dropping by on the internet. Because what I do is as I record these, I've sort of dropped the 2 musical stings slightly after the post credits, and I try and do it so that I then just talk and time it so that they chop in, so I don't have to do too much editing afterwards. So it's almost like doing it live. It's the countdown to the news, Toby. You've got just time to plug Ko-fi before that musical sting that you can see looming ahead of you. So that's how that was done. And I was inclined to try and do it. Sometimes it happens where I talk too long and then have to jiggle stuff about. But it took me, I think, about 12 goes to get the opening. Narration is the wrong word, but the intro, the stuff about positively inclined Doctor Who thing. And actually, I made a little stumble in it that I cut out rather than try and say the whole 40-second spiel that I've said about 250 times. It's because I don't have a scripted spiel for the beginning. I just try and sort of fit it in. I think it would be boring if it was always the same. I think some professional brand type people would go, no, you have to say exactly the same thing because then it's recognisable and the listeners know what they're getting. I think the listeners know what they're getting. They've trawled through their internet provider, their podcast provider. They've read the name of the podcast. They've chosen this particular episode. In fact, I think it's quite nice if the opening is slightly different, because then if you're listening to the wrong episode, I'm currently listening to one that's a couple of years old, but it's a story. And every time the episode finishes, I want it to jump to the next episode, and it doesn't. It jumps to either the trailer for the whole thing or one I've heard before or the latest episode. So every time the episode ends, I have to sort of scramble and fumble to get the thing out of my pocket before I get the wrong episode. Or I start listening, I go, I'm sure I've heard this episode before. So that's the reason it's like, because you go, hang on, this isn't the opening. Or you go, oh yes, this is a slightly different phraseology of the opening spiel to the last episode I heard. So therefore, yeah, I can relax and not have to dive into my pocket and ruin my day and curse modern technology and why it doesn't work properly. And I've downloaded the thing. I'm following it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I've not come for internet advice. I'll live the dropout about the Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes and the malfeasance that she indulged in. It's the world we live in, isn't it? Have you got millions of pounds? Yes. Well, here's some million more because you've got chutzpah and self-confidence and a product that doesn't work, hasn't followed any of the medical testing. It's fascinating, very interesting. Because I don't just listen to Doctor Who podcast. I mostly do, though. But no, I don't. I listen to a lot of political ones as well, and a couple of comedy ones. But I quite like a true crime thriller, you know. I quite like a true crime thriller. So perhaps what you need to do instead of listening to somebody try and say interesting things about Attack of the Cybermen, you should be listening to The Nobody Zone or Serial or West Cork or some such. But if you like this stuff, this is my brand manager. If I had one, I would be going, don't cross-contaminate your Doctor Who stuff by mentioning other genres and other podcasts that you have no stake in whatsoever. But I suppose this is the advantage of not having a brand manager. In fact, if I ever have a brand manager, that is time to finish me off. Toby in 2022 says, that's when I think you can go, he's changed, off him. I mean, it's a bit of a severe punishment, isn't it, for somebody embracing corporate identity? But I think for me, it would be probably what I deserve. Anyway, so now that I've initiated some kind of time assassination for myself, I think I'll probably... I'm going to go and record an epic. Too much information. Timeline fans, which actually you will have heard before this. So you know the Marco Polo episode 1, Too Much Information, that you heard 4 or 5 months ago. Yeah, I did that. I did that after I did this. Unless you're a patron, in which case they're going to get this first. But this can act as a trailer to the very next release, which is released in a couple of days. Because you patrons, you get an embarrassment of riches, don't you? All right, don't shout at once. No, it's don't all shout at once, isn't it? Oh, I've ruined that. And it's a quote from a different story. It was going so well. It wasn't even going so well, but now it's just going to tail off.